Transposition is the operation of moving written pitches on a score up or down by a constant interval. This can be done by rewriting the music, or more often, it is done at sight by the performer. In this module, you will learn that understanding the process of transposition is very important in order to understand how to work with other musicians. Let's look at this simple piece for piano. Here is what the piece sounds like. Let's say you were given the task of having to transpose this piece so that every pitch sounds a major second lower than written. Based on our definition of transposition, we would look at each pitch and carefully move it down a major second. While this process is not incorrect, it is very tedious. Instead, we can use all of our music theory knowledge in order to create a more holistic approach to this task. First, let's analyze the given piece of music in order to learn a little bit more about what's going on musically. By the given key signature, we see that the piece is in the key of G major. We can verify this by seeing that the first and last pitches are both Gs. We can use our knowledge of solfege to see how every pitch in the melody relates back to the home tonic, or Do. In fact, we can even sing this melody to ourselves using solfege. Do, re, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, mi, fa, re, do. We could look at each pitch in terms of scale degree numbers or piano fingering numbers as well. Now that we know what the key is and how all the pitches relate back to the tonic, we can begin to infer what the pitches of a transposition down a major second would be. First, if we look at the key signature, we can think about what the key signature would be if it were a major second lower. A major second lower than G is F. So if this piece were transposed down a major second, we would now be playing in the key of F major. From here, we can think in this new key and slide every pitch down so that F is now the tonic. We then relate every pitch of the melody to the tonic of the F major scale, and as we play the transposition on the piano, we can think of the solfege, or the scale degree numbers, or the piano fingering numbers, whatever method you like best. We just have to be careful that we remember our new key signature, and that all of the B's will now be B flats. Another musical factor that can help us in transposing at sight is to look at the contour of the melody. This melody is entirely stepwise on the first line. There is one repeated pitch here. At the end of the first line, there is a big leap of a perfect octave when we switch between the right and the left hands. The second line is almost entirely stepwise motion, except for when we get to here, where there is a skip of a minor third before we step back down home to the tonic. By going through the process on this example, we can now infer a procedure for completing the task of transposing at sight. First, look carefully at the piece you will have to transpose. Pay attention to the key, the contour, and think of it in terms of solfege or scale degree numbers, or if it's for piano, in terms of piano fingering numbers. Determine by what interval you will have to transpose and in what direction you need to go, up or down. Mentally move the key signature to the key for the transposed key. Find the tonic in the new key. Now replicate the solfege, or scale degree numbers, or piano fingering numbers in the new key, being sure to replicate the contour. So why is transposition a thing? Why do we need to learn how to do this? There are many reasons why, but they all boil down to one major reason: collaboration with other musicians. Accompanists change keys to accommodate a vocalist. Sometimes there are various editions of a piece and many keys for all vocal ranges, but very often this has to be done on the fly. There are also many transposing instruments. A transposing instrument is an instrument that sounds lower or higher than its notated pitch. That means that the frequency of the pitch coming out of the instrument is different than the pitch indicated on the music a performer is reading. There are actually more transposing instruments than non-transposing instruments. Here are just the most common transposing instruments. Some transposing instruments are simpler than others. For instance, there are those instruments which just sound an octave lower or higher than written. For example, a piccolo player will read this pitch on the staff. It is written as an A5. However, the frequency of the pitch that comes out of the instrument is an octave higher than the written pitch. These instruments are transposing so that performers don't have to read ledger lines all the time. Other instruments are transposing so that a player can easily switch between instruments of the same family and still use the same fingerings, such as switching between members of the clarinet or the saxophone family. Instruments such as trumpets and horns are transposing due to their historical evolution. These instruments didn't always have valves to press so that they could play all chromatic pitches. Instead, they could only play pitches that were part of the harmonic series for the fundamental pitch of the size and shape of the instrument. That meant that players had to switch between different sized instruments in order to play in different keys. We eventually invented valves, but some specific transpositions stuck. Here are just the most common non-octave transposing instruments. The English horn and the French horn both sound down a perfect fifth lower than written. The B-flat clarinet and B-flat trumpet sound a major second lower than written. The alto saxophone sound a major sixth lower than written. The bass clarinet and tenor saxophone sound a major ninth lower than written. That's an octave plus a major second. The baritone saxophone sounds an octave plus a major sixth lower than written. As an example, let's look at a B-flat trumpet. A trumpet player will read this note on their music. Here it is a written C5. When the trumpet player fingers a C and plays, the pitch that comes out of the trumpet is actually the frequency of a B-flat 4. So we return to the why of it all again. Again, it's all about collaboration with other musicians. Conductors must read open scores that include both transposing and non-transposing instruments. They need to know what all the transpositions are so they can determine if the players are playing the correct notes. Musicians worked together and therefore need to understand the properties of each other's instruments. Finally, composers need to know how to write for transposing instruments so that their music will sound the way that they intend it to. Being able to read and transpose music at sight is a very important skill for any musician. As musicians, we don't perform in a bubble all by ourselves. We perform with many other musicians. Music theory helps us communicate with each other in the same language. Transposition helps us to actually perform together and to understand how it is possible.